My name is Serafina, and there was a time when I lived two lives at once, one that the world could see, and another that unfolded quietly behind drawn curtains, whispered candles, and notebooks filled with symbols no one else could read. I never expected to speak about that life again, much less confess it in plain daylight, but something about the approaching edge of 2026 has been pressing against me like an unfinished sentence. It began as a faint unease, the way you sometimes feel when you forget a word that sits just beyond your reach, and then it grew into a steady insistence. If you know what I know, you don't stay silent, you speak, because the first money you spend in 2026 does more than pay for an item or a service. It quietly tells a story about the year you are stepping into. And that story has a way of becoming real before you even realize you've started to live inside it. Back then, when I was still immersed in that hidden world, we were taught that money was not simply paper or numbers on a screen. It was treated as a kind of language, a way your life spoke to itself. The first payment of a new year was never considered small or meaningless. It was approached with the same care one might give to the first words spoken after waking from a long sleep. It was believed to be a signal flare, something that rose quietly into the invisible parts of your mind and said, "This is how we begin." And what still troubles me, is how rarely people choose that beginning consciously. They stumble into it half awake, buying something out of habit, rushing or distraction, never realizing that they are laying down the emotional and mental tone their year will follow. I've watched people step into January already feeling behind, already feeling rushed, already feeling as though money is something that slips through their hands instead of something they guide. They tell themselves it's just a coffee, just a tank of gas, just a forgotten subscription. But what they're really doing is rehearsing a story about scarcity, urgency, and reaction. And the mind, eager to be consistent, quietly repeats that story all year long. It looks for proof. It notices setbacks more than opportunities. It hesitates when it should act. It spends when it should pause. No candles are needed for this. No chance. It happens in the silent machinery of your own expectations. The strange thing is, most people believe their financial year is shaped by luck, by timing, by forces beyond their reach. They rarely suspect that their very first transaction has already nudged their behavior into a familiar groove. That one small act becomes a reference point, what feels normal, what feels like me, what feels like my kind of year, and from there, decisions quietly line up. Risks feel either too frightening or oddly irresistible. Saving feels either natural or constantly postponed. Growth feels either possible or like something meant for other people. The year begins to write itself. I am not sharing this to frighten you or dress it in mystery. I'm sharing it because I've seen how gently, almost kindly, this process works and how easily it can be redirected. The doorway into 2026 is closer than it feels, and the first step you take through it will say more about your year than any resolution you write in a notebook. Before you even realize it, your mind will be listening, waiting to hear what kind of story you are about to tell yourself, and then, very quietly, it will begin to make that story real. When I first stumbled into that hidden world, I was nothing more than a curious girl with a notebook full of questions and a heart that refused to accept that the universe was just random noise. The older women, cloaked in quiet authority and the smell of herbs, told me early on that money was a living thing, a current that flowed through intention and attention, not just hands and wallets. They taught me that each coin carried more than value. It carried a message, a pulse of energy that could be directed or wasted, welcomed or ignored. I remember sitting in the dim light of a single candle, the wax dripping slowly into a dish like molten time, as one of them, an elegant woman whose voice seemed to echo from another century, leaned close and said, "Serafina, the first money you spend in any cycle is a whisper to your future self. It tells her what to expect. It sets the rhythm of everything that follows." I didn't understand it then, but the weight of the words pressed into my chest, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't yet found. They would make me practice with small exercises at first, trivial amounts meant to teach awareness rather than wealth. A single coin placed into a jar, a modest purchase at the market. But the rituals were precise. You were supposed to focus on what the transaction meant, not what it bought. Was it gratitude, investment, preparation, or waste? Was it aligning with growth, stability, or mindless indulgence? They drilled into me that the first exchange of the year, the first financial step after a new calendar opens, is the most sacred. It is a declaration you make to yourself before the world demands anything from you. That single act, whether it is handled with thoughtfulness or disregard, sets a silent precedent for how your mind will navigate the months ahead. I remember the feeling of awe mixed with fear the first time I tried it myself. My hands shook slightly as I held a single note, imagining it as a seed rather than currency. The older women circled, murmuring guidance, encouraging visualization of the kind of year I wanted. They explained that it wasn't magic in the supernatural sense. It was subtle, intimate, psychological. The act of conscious spending told the mind what kind of year to anticipate, and the mind, eager to maintain consistency, quietly nudged behaviors, choices, and reactions in alignment with that first intent. Over time, I learned to see patterns, to notice the difference between a year that began with clarity and one that began with haste or carelessness. I began to recognize how a thoughtless first purchase, an impulsive coffee, a last-minute snack, a rushed convenience echoed through the rest of the year, and I began to grasp the responsibility, the quiet power that each person holds in their own hands at the very start of a new cycle. It wasn't a spell book that dictated wealth. It was attention, intention, and the subtle architecture of the mind, noticing, remembering, and following the very first movement of money, like a note in a song yet to be fully composed. I was fascinated and sometimes terrified by how something so ordinary could carry such unseen weight. Every first purchase became a lesson, every transaction a mirror, reflecting not only what I wanted, but also what I believed I deserved. And behind closed doors, with only the candlelight and the quiet murmurs of my mentors, I began to understand the fragile, profound truth they had been trying to pass on, that financial life, like so much else, begins in silence, in ritual, and in awareness before it ever touches the material world. It's strange, but most people don't realize how easily they stumble into patterns that dictate the course of their entire year. I watched it happen over and over again, even before I fully understood the mechanics of intention. People wake up on January 1st, bleary-eyed, with resolutions that never stick, and yet they reach for their wallets and begin spending almost unconsciously. They buy what is convenient, what is familiar, what is comfortable, rarely considering that the first exchange of money is more than a transaction, it is a declaration. I've seen it countless times. Someone grabs a coffee on the way to work, pays a late fee, fills the car with gas because they're already running behind, or even just orders something online out of habit, barely noticing the numbers scrolling across the screen. And with each of those actions, without realizing it, they are whispering a story to their own subconscious. This is the way the year begins. This is how I manage, how I move, how I value what I have. The first mistake is thinking that one small purchase is meaningless, but our minds are far more attuned to pattern than we give them credit for. That first transaction becomes the template, the energetic blueprint, even if the dollar amount is negligible. If the year begins with reactionary spending, paying off emergencies, indulging in convenience, or scrambling to cover obligations, it programs a subtle expectation of scarcity, urgency, and stress. The mind, in its quiet efficiency, takes that cue seriously. It begins to seek confirmation, to arrange thoughts, decisions, and behaviors around the rhythm of that first step. A year that starts with chaos in small ways often continues in the same cadence, almost as if the mind is honoring an unspoken contract it signed in those early hours of January. I think the truly ironic part is how people almost always complain about their financial life without realizing that they themselves are scripting it, sometimes from the very first minute of the new year. They say things like, "I don't know why money never works out for me," or "every year is the same, I can't catch up." But if you look closely at the start of those years, you can almost always trace it back to the very first dollars exchanged. Impulsive, reactive, distracted spending is a quiet curse, the kind that creeps into every decision afterward. It tells the subconscious that survival is the main objective, that growth is optional, that security is fragile. And the mind listens. I've also noticed that the energy behind the first purchase matters as much as the act itself. A rushed coffee bought with irritation, an impulsive snack bought with boredom, a last-minute online order made out of anxiety. These are all messages that travel far beyond the immediate moment. They ripple through the rest of the year, shaping not only financial behavior, but the emotional relationship one has with money. Instead of a year built on intention, the person experiences a year dictated by reaction, chasing, and compromise. It is subtle enough that many never even notice, but the effect is real and accumulative. Most people believe luck, external circumstances, or timing dictate the way their finances unfold. Few stop to consider that they are, in effect, issuing the first command of the year with the way they spend, and that this command is being quietly obeyed by their own mind. And that, more than any external factor, is why so many people seem trapped in cycles they never intended to enter, why the year feels heavy before it's even 2 weeks old, and why, if you pay attention, you can see the same story repeating in every small early act of spending. It's a truth both simple and profound. The year begins in the first movement, and too often that movement is taken without thought, without pause, without consciousness, and it silently lays the groundwork for struggle before opportunity ever has a chance to knock. It's funny how few people understand that their brain doesn't see the year as a calendar or a set of numbers. It sees patterns, sequences, and references. I learned this the hard way when I was still immersed in my old practices, spending hours observing not just actions, but reactions, not just choices, but the invisible scripts guiding them. The human mind is like a meticulous archivist, quietly taking note of what is normal and what is expected, and then arranging future behavior to fit that template. That first purchase in a new year is not just money leaving your hands, it's a signal that says, this is the way things are done now, and your brain, ever obedient, begins arranging everything to confirm it. It doesn't reason in abstract notions of good or bad, it reasons in consistency. If the first step says rush, scramble, react, the mind interprets that as the default rhythm of the months ahead. If the first step says prepare, invest, deliberate, the brain quietly charts a path for growth, security, and control. I used to watch people's lives unfold like experiments in pattern recognition, each small act a variable, each day a test. When someone begins the year with thoughtless, impulsive spending, the mind doesn't shrug it off. It catalogues it as the opening statement. This is the narrative we follow. It will look for confirmation in every decision, in every temptation, in every impulse. It will notice when bills arrive, when opportunities arise, when challenges appear, and it will compare each situation to that first precedent. And if there is misalignment, if the first purchase was careless, but the year demands careful planning, the mind experiences tension. Stress rises, decisions are delayed, opportunities are missed, all because the initial signal was misaligned with the reality that follows. On the other hand, when that first act of spending is deliberate, intentional, meaningful, the brain interprets it as a promise to itself. This is the way we operate. This is the type of year we follow. This is the story we live into. And then something subtle but powerful happens. The subconscious begins to align behavior with that first statement. You find yourself making decisions that echo the tone of your opening move. Investments feel natural. Saving feels logical. Patience comes easier. Opportunities are recognized and acted upon. It isn't magic, it's neurological obedience. The mind, hungry for consistency, creates a scaffolding around that first action, and that scaffolding supports the year you have unconsciously declared. I've also noticed that the first transaction doesn't need to be large or extravagant. Even the smallest, simplest, most modest act can carry enormous weight if it is done with awareness. A single intentional choice can ripple across months, informing not only financial behavior, but confidence, foresight, and a sense of control. Conversely, a careless act, no matter how minor, can ripple in the opposite direction, breeding indecision, scarcity thinking, and reactionary patterns that persist far longer than one might expect. And the quiet irony is that this process operates beneath our awareness. Few notice it happening. Few pause to consider that the mind is observing and cataloguing, interpreting and responding, yet it is happening every year, every January, every moment after that first act of money exchanges hands. The brain is not passive. It is a vigilant, faithful recorder and interpreter, silently programming the rules of engagement for the months to come, long before conscious thought has a chance to weigh in. And that, I realized, is the hidden power and the subtle danger of the first financial move we make in a new year. It sets the stage, writes the first lines, and quietly orchestrates the script that the rest of our decisions will follow. It all comes down to a single, deceptively simple question, one that I learned to ask myself over and over again in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world was still and January seemed to stretch like an empty page. Most people overlook it, dismissing the first act of spending as too trivial to matter, but I came to realize that this single inquiry could shift the trajectory of an entire year. The question is, what kind of year am I declaring with this first transaction? Pause on that for a moment. Really feel it, because what seems like a small purchase, a routine expense, even a minor indulgence, carries a weight far greater than its monetary value. It is a signal, a declaration, a word spoken aloud to your subconscious before the world begins demanding its version of reality from you. I learned to ask this question quietly, without fanfare, sometimes while standing at a grocery checkout, sometimes with my hand hovering over the pay button online. And when I did, it forced me to slow down, to notice not only what I was buying, but why. Was this transaction a statement of survival or a statement of growth? Was I unconsciously accepting scarcity as the natural state of my life? Or was I deliberately choosing abundance in thought and intention, even if the amount I spent was small? It became almost meditative, a ritual of clarity rather than a ritual of spell work. The first payment of the year was no longer just money leaving my hands. It was a question I posed to myself: who am I in this year, and how will I allow myself to act? Most people don't ask this question, and that is why they stumble into cycles that feel frustratingly repetitive. They make their first purchase without thought, without intention, without consciousness, and in doing so, they inadvertently declare a story for themselves. This is the way my year begins. This is how I respond. This is the rhythm I follow. And the mind, loyal and efficient, begins to obey. The reactionary habits, the scarcity mindset, the impulse decisions, they all gain legitimacy because they were quietly sanctioned at the very beginning. The pattern is set before anyone has had a chance to plan, before strategies are formed, before resolutions even have time to take root. When I started asking that question intentionally, everything shifted. It made me confront the energy behind my choices, not just the choices themselves. Suddenly, even small actions became meaningful. Paying for a cup of tea could be a declaration of patience. Investing in a course could be a declaration of growth. Depositing a single dollar into a savings account could be a declaration of security. The first act of spending, when approached with consciousness, became a way of telling my mind, this is what matters. This is the tone we set. This is how we will navigate the months ahead. It is remarkable how much power is contained in a question so simple, so easy to overlook, yet so capable of quietly guiding the course of an entire year. It forces you to confront not only your actions, but your intentions, your expectations, and even your fears. And the answer to that question doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to involve large sums of money or dramatic gestures. It only needs to be deliberate, aware, and aligned with the life you want to step into. Asking it transforms the ordinary into something sacred, the mundane into something purposeful, and the first moment of a new year into the quiet architect of everything that follows. I used to think that changing the course of a year required grand gestures, dramatic decisions, or months of meticulous planning. But the truth, the quiet and almost imperceptible truth I discovered over years of observation, is that the shift is gentle. It starts in the smallest act, the first choice, the subtle moment when you reach for your wallet with awareness instead of autopilot. That first purchase of the year is not just a financial transaction, it is a declaration of intention, a quiet statement to your own mind about what kind of life you are willing to inhabit. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't need to be extravagant. A single thoughtful choice, even modest in its material weight, can ripple through the months to come, guiding behavior, shaping mindset, and creating a framework that your brain instinctively honors. I remember one January, years ago, when I decided that my first transaction would be a small donation to a cause I cared about. It wasn't much, barely enough to register beyond the sense of fulfillment. But the intention behind it was enormous. As I watched my subconscious register that act, I noticed a subtle shift in my approach to the rest of the year. Decisions felt calmer, more deliberate. Spending felt more conscious. Opportunities that I might have ignored before now seemed visible, almost as if my mind was paying attention to a different frequency, one that aligned with growth, generosity, and awareness. It was the gentle shift in the rhythm of my actions, a cadence that began with that single, intentional act and quietly orchestrated months of behavior in a way that felt effortless but profoundly real. Most people underestimate the weight of small beginnings. They believe that only large investments, bold choices, or major lifestyle changes can shape a year. But I saw the opposite over and over. It is the subtlety, the quietness, the unassuming nature of the first intentional act that carries the most power. That first dollar, spent with mindfulness and purpose, sends a signal to the mind that resonates far beyond the moment. It says, I am deliberate, I am attentive, I am choosing the path I want to follow. And the mind, ever loyal to patterns, begins to honor that signal in ways that can't always be consciously noticed, but are felt in the flow of days, weeks, and months that follow. I also learned that the gentle shift works because it doesn't demand perfection. You don't have to know every detail of the year ahead, nor do you need to calculate the ideal budget or predict every challenge. You only need to act with conscious intent at the very first moment. A single step, a single choice can quietly realign everything else that comes after it. The mind uses it as a reference, a standard, a tone that dictates how you respond, where you place your attention, and how you measure value. The first act becomes the pulse, the rhythm, the invisible architecture of the months to come. Over time, I began to see patterns emerge not just in my life, but in others' lives as well. Those who approached the year with even a small moment of awareness experienced a ripple effect. Clarity arrived where confusion had once lingered. Opportunities were recognized instead of overlooked. Patience became a natural response rather than a constant struggle. The shift is gentle, yes, almost imperceptible at first, but it is transformative in its quiet insistence. And it all begins in that single conscious moment when you choose not to spend by habit or impulse, but with purpose, direction, and awareness of the story you are quietly declaring for the year ahead. I need you to understand something before you continue your day, before you make another purchase, before you allow habit to dictate your choices without a second thought. The first money you spend in 2026 is not just a coin exchanged for a product, a note handed over for service, or a digital transfer across a screen. It is a declaration. It is the opening chapter of a story your mind will write for you, whether you consciously want it to or not. It is the quiet architect of your entire financial landscape for the next 12 months. And it is the single act that carries more weight than every resolution, every plan, every intention you think you've set. If you understand this, if you truly absorb it, then you begin to see the world differently. Every transaction is a sentence, every choice a paragraph, every decision a page that contributes to the book of your year. And the first page, it is the one that sets the tone, the rhythm, the energy, and the expectations that follow, almost invisibly but unmistakably. Think about the power in that. One moment, one choice, one small act of conscious spending at the very start of the year can quietly orchestrate months of behavior in ways that are subtle yet undeniable. You can spend carelessly and stumble into scarcity, urgency, and reaction. You can spend in distraction and find yourself trapped in cycles you never meant to create. Or you can spend intentionally, even in the smallest amounts, and begin a ripple that carries forward, shaping your mindset, your confidence, your courage, and your ability to recognize opportunity. This is not superstition, not ritual, not mystical thinking. It is the undeniable response of your own mind to the patterns you establish. Your subconscious is faithful to the signals you send, obedient in ways you cannot always consciously detect, aligning your behavior to the very first act you choose to commit. Every year, people wake up on January 1st and act as if nothing has changed, as if the first dollar they spend is just a drop in the ocean, a meaningless footnote. They forget that the mind thrives on patterns, that it seeks consistency, that it reads the first signal as instruction. They forget that habit is powerful, but intention is stronger. That moment when the coin leaves your hand or the screen registers your transaction is the moment when the story of your financial year begins. And no one else can write it for you. No external advice, no market trend. No luck can override the story you unconsciously declare with that first choice. It is yours, entirely yours, and it carries consequences far beyond what you imagine. So here is the truth, unfiltered and unflinching. 2026 will follow the lead of that first act. If it is careless, hesitant, reactive, or distracted, the year will mirror those qualities. If it is deliberate, conscious, intentional, and aligned with the life you truly want to live, the year will mirror that as well. The first purchase is not just an opening, it is the blueprint, the invisible framework, the silent guide. It speaks louder than words, louder than resolutions, louder than promises. It is the quiet voice your mind listens to, shaping every step, every choice, every opportunity, and every obstacle. And once that voice is set, once the rhythm is declared, your mind will orchestrate a dance that either serves you or undermines you, all according to the signal you've sent. So consider this. Reflect deeply, deliberately, without distraction. Before you spend, before you swipe, before you transfer that first dollar, ask yourself what you are declaring. What story are you writing? What kind of year are you claiming? Not in words, not in wishful thinking, but in action, in motion, in the very first choice that will set the tone for everything that follows. Because that first dollar, that first act is not small. It is not trivial. It is the first note in the symphony of your year, and the way it is played will echo long after the calendar turns, long after resolutions fade, long after intentions are forgotten. And the answer to this question, the weight of this truth, the choice that you make in that first moment, it will define the year you live.